This past weekend I was preaching, though, in Norwalk, Ohio, and on Sunday morning, as I looked out into the crowd, I saw this face, and it was a man wearing bib overalls. He was wearing a white shirt, and he was wearing a red bow tie. And I had no idea who this guy was as I preached, or even when he left. He just introduced himself as Lee Jones, and he said it was nice to meet you. However, I later learned this face. He's been a judge on Iron Chef America, a guest on Robert Irvine's Bizarre Foods. He's been featured in numerous national publications, including Bon Appetit, Cooking Light, Gourmet, Newsweek, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. The Farm has been featured on The Martha Stewart Show, Food Network's Roker on the Road, the ABC World News. But what was interesting to me was his signature outfit. It doesn't matter if he's on Iron Chef or if he's at the James Beard Awards for the best chefs in America. Doesn't matter if he's meeting the president's wife. Doesn't matter if it's on the cover of his book. He always wears his white shirt, his red bow tie, and his bib overalls. He's got a closet full of them. You walk in his closet, it's bib overalls, white shirts, red bow ties. That's his thing. It's part of his brand, and it is literally branded. And whenever he's in public, he's wearing and he's representing his brand. So when you see this outfit, it represents not just him, though. It represents something far greater than just this eccentric style. It represents the farm. It represents the Vegetable Culinary Institute that he's the head of. It represents Veggie U. It brings to mind his new book. It automatically begins to trigger much more than just the man. It's his entire vegetable empire. And various individuals or organizations have a brand. They have a trademark which represents them. Anybody knows that if you're driving down the highway somewhere and you see the golden arches in the distance, you know that there's a Big Mac and a broken milkshake machine somewhere nearby. Nike has popularized the Jumpman logo. That's the silhouette of Michael Jordan from his Chicago Bulls days. And it's attached to every pair of Jordans. And Chick-fil-A is known for its characteristic friendly service, which often comes with a "my pleasure" as you are served. That's just their brand. That's their trademark. That's how they want to be known. And it got me to thinking, as Christians, that we are all representing the brand. If we claim to be Christians, then we are walking embodiments of Jesus Christ. A Christian is a follower of Jesus Christ. We should be little miniature representations of Jesus Christ in our lives. And so if Christianity were trademarked, what would and what should it look like in our lives? And we could go to a lot of passages, and the more I thought of this, the longer this sermon got. But we could go to a lot of passages to think about what would represent the Christian trademark appropriately. But today I want to look at maybe a little different passage, Ephesians chapter 4 and Ephesians chapter 5. And so if you want to turn over to Ephesians 4 and 5 with me, the companion passage would be Colossians 3, so you can read that on your own afterwards as well. But I think we can see a few of the trademarks of Christianity from Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 5, based upon what that text says. So we're just going to walk through this, and I'm going to suggest a few trademarks of Christianity, things that we could call our trademark based upon this text. And first of all, what I would say is that as Christians, one of our, perhaps a trademark of a Christian could be that we're like a diamond in the rough. That's what Christians should be like. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, that person, they're just a diamond in the rough? Christ was a diamond in the rough. He was just this diamond who came out of Nazareth, just this amazing person out of a very common city. And Christians should be diamonds. In fact, 1 Peter 2:7 actually calls us precious stones. We should just stand out from ordinary rock. We're like a red ruby in the midst of a gravel pile. The world is the rock. And what this means is once you truly embrace the Christian walk, it is not going to look like most of the rest of the world. You are going to be unique. You are going to be different than the rest of the world around you if you are a Christian. Being Christ-like means that you are world different. You will think differently than the world. You will act differently than the world. You will talk differently than the world. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 17, it says, "So I say this and affirm in the Lord that you are to no longer walk just as the Gentiles also walk." He's telling them you're going to have to be different than the rest of the world around you. There's going to be something different about you. He says they walk in the futility of their minds, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. They, having become callous, have given themselves up to indecent behavior for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. Notice how the Gentiles are being described. They don't act properly, they act indecently. They don't act with purity, they act with impurity. They're not people content with what they have, they are people who are greedy. He says, you did not learn Christ in this way. You're going to have to be different, he's telling the Christians in Ephesus. You're going to have to be unique. You're not going to be like the world. And the reason why we're not like the world is because we're not living for the short-term pleasures of this world. 1 John 2:15 says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world." It says all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, it is not of the Father, it is of the world. And what's the problem with that? Well, he says in 1 John, the world is passing away. This world's going to be gone. This world is only temporary. This world, as we sing, is not my home. We're just passing through. So don't live for temporary things. If your life is being lived to satisfy your carnal pleasures, if you're living without restraint, in order to make yourself fit in with the rest of the world, then you are not wearing the brand. You aren't being the distinctive trademark that God calls you to be with his imprint. You are making friendship with the world. And James tells us that being friends with the world makes us an enemy of God. But as you go on to read in Ephesians 4, it says, don't act like the Gentiles because you didn't learn Christ in this way. If indeed you have heard of him, he goes on to say, and have been taught in him, this is verse 21, just as the truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former way of life, you are to rid yourselves of the old self. Whatever it is you live for, however it is you acted and talked in the past, when you become a Christian, you're going to be acting differently now. It says your old self, as it goes on, is corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit. You are to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and you are to put on the new self. You're wearing a new brand now. You're putting on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. You cannot truly see the changes in your walk and in your lifestyle until you change and renew your mind, until you make the decision to truly serve Christ. And when you do, you're going to wear the likeness of God. You will begin to live for righteousness, for holiness, and for truth. And so if you wear the name of Christ, what we're going to begin to see is we're going to begin to see a new you. You will not put up with bad attitudes in yourself anymore. You will no longer be living to please the world around you anymore. Your mindset will be so focused on Jesus that carrying his cross and pleasing him as your master will be all that truly matters in this life. And so what exactly are some of the things that that's going to involve? Well, I think as we are to trademark Christianity, we might say that Christians are diamonds in the rough. We're certainly going to be unique, but yet special and precious in this world. But we're going to also start seeing certain things. And perhaps one of our trademarks is our honesty. In other words, we should be people who, if we were to take a lie detector test, we'd have a clean lie detector test. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25, as the text goes on, as it goes on to explain, here's what your new self should look like. Here's what a Christian should look like. It goes on to say, you should rid yourselves of falsehood In other words, that's the way we once acted in the past. We once perhaps told lies to get ourselves out of trouble. But he says we're not like that anymore. We once maybe told lies or exaggerated some things to make ourselves look good. We might have told a lie here and there to gain personally. We might have cheated on our taxes a little bit, or maybe pressured someone to fudge the numbers a little bit for our own personal or corporate gain. But you, as a Christian now, have put away falsehood. You've put away lying and cheating. And now our job is to speak truth, each one of you, with his neighbor. If we are serving the God of truth, we are people of truth. We are speaking truth. We are telling the truth. We no longer are content with telling lies. You know, the world doesn't blink when it comes to lying. Sometimes we lie out of cowardice. Sometimes we lie out of malice. We tell lies about people because we don't like them, hate them. Sometimes we lie out of greed, and we do so for personal or business or corporate advantage. Sometimes we lie to fit in with a group. Peter did that, right? He lied about knowing Jesus so he could kind of fit in with a group that was really persecuting Jesus. Lied about knowing Jesus at all. Sometimes we're religious liars. We lie about religious things. But this common habit, and I read some statistics that said that 91% of people commonly lie. 9 out of 10. Just a common habit for them. This has to be put away if you're truly going to represent Christ. Even under the old covenant, lying was one of the 7 sins that God hated, and yet it still ensnared people. We could look at a whole lot of Old Testament examples of people who lied. Even good people sometimes lied. Abram lied. David lied when he lied about the sin with Bathsheba. He tried to cover some things up. But those are things that we've got to get out of our lives. The Christian is known for total honesty. We are people who are completely honest. We speak truth with one another. Satan is the father of lies, but Jesus is the embodiment of truth. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And so whose child are you? Well, let me tell you, if you're telling lies, if you're still dishonest, if you're still somebody who's deceitful in your talk, then you're allowing Satan to be your daddy. You're like him. You're acting like Satan's spawn. When you're a person committed to truth and total honesty, then God the Father's image is going to be shining brightly within you. So one of our trademarks needs to be that we're people that would pass lie detector tests, a clean lie detector test. We're people of honesty. Let us go on and look at a few other things that are mentioned in Ephesians chapter 4. And perhaps one of our trademarks is that we're kind of like a stoplight. We're kind of like a stoplight. The stoplight's got the green. It tells you when to go. We're people of action when it's time to be people of action. The stoplight's got the yellow, which cautions you. So we're people of caution when we realize that the situation may be dangerous. And there's sometimes where we just got to outright stop. There's a red light up every once in a while. And that takes self-control. When God says you can't go here, we've got to be people who are willing to stop and go no further. And if you take a look at Ephesians 4, I think there's some situations that are presented here where we need to kind of have and exhibit discretion and need to exhibit self-control. Look at Ephesians 4 and verse 26. It says, be angry and yet do not sin. When you're angry, the caution light should be going up in your mind and in your heart. Be angry. And you know what? We get angry. That's just a natural emotion. People make us angry. Things upset us. We could go on and take a look at a lot of examples of that. But when you're angry, the devil wants to use you. The devil wants you to lash out in your anger in a sinful way. And so this passage says, be angry, but don't sin. And don't let the sun go down on your anger. And don't give the devil an opportunity. Caution yourself when you're angry. You know, the devil can work in a lot of ways. He can use the news. Have you ever watched the news and just kind of got angry? He can use social media. Have you ever read something that somebody posted and it just kind of ticked you off? Why'd they have to say that? Have you ever just kind of started to type something and then you're like, I can't type that, and you erased it, right? Because you're angry. The devil can use the news. He can use your social media. He can use your family. Families ever said something that got you kind of hot? He can use your coworkers. He can use your neighbors. He can use the guy who cuts you off on I-69 to trigger that anger. The devil can work in a lot of ways. And when you sense that anger coming on, that yellow caution light has to come out in our minds. Because if Satan can get you to lash out, he can start getting you to wear his brand. You know, this is as old as Cain. If you look at Genesis chapter 4, where Cain is upset with Abel, and he's not rightly upset with Abel. He's upset because God favored Abel's offering and not his. And if you look at Genesis chapter 4, and in verse 5, it says that God did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. You can sometimes see anger on people's face when they're upset, right? That seems to be what's being indicated here. Cain is upset. It's all over his face. Sometimes people wear their emotions on their sleeve when they're upset. They're pouting or they're mad or, angry face. That's what emojis are about, right? The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? He says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin lies at the door. But listen to this. Its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. I think what God was telling Cain here is that you have the power to overcome your anger and not lash out in your anger in a sinful way. God is cautioning him not to do what Cain is probably already thinking about doing, which is, I'd like to get rid of the person who I'm jealous of, who I'm angry with, because that will eliminate the problem, right? Well, not so. And we know the rest of the story, right? Cain goes and kills Abel. Cain eventually is punished and left as a fugitive as a result of it because of his anger. But he had the power to rule over it. And he needed to do what Ephesians 4 is calling us to do, and that is, when you're angry, be careful not to sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Try to deal with it quickly and promptly, but make sure that the devil's not working through you in your anger. We need to be people as Christians who throw up the caution light and don't respond in anger. Now, what are some of the things that we might do as we respond in anger? Well, if you keep on reading through Ephesians 4, we're going to skip over verse 28 because it's a different topic, I think. But it says in verse 28, let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth. Have you ever gotten angry and then you said something that you wish you had not have said? Well, of course we have, right? No. So this passage is telling you, here's how the devil is working in you. He's using your unwholesome words to use you. He says, instead of unwholesome words, you need to make sure that as Christians now, if there is any good word for edification, according to the need of the moment, say that so that it will give grace to those who hear. We are not people who are trying to be destructive with our words. We are people who want to be constructive with our words. We want to edify and build up, not break down and tear down. In verse 30, it says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God. Did you know that God can get saddened by the way that you act and the way that you talk? That's what I get from verse 30. Don't grieve the Holy Spirit, because you can grieve the Holy Spirit, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Have you as a parent ever heard something that maybe your kid said in front of you, or you heard about something they said to someone else, and it kind of broke your heart to think that your precious little children talk that way? Said something. It grieves you. It grieves us when our children disappoint us from time to time. And it grieves the Holy Spirit when we act in a way that is harmful to the people that God has created. So what are some of the things that we might say? Well, look at verse 31. When we're angry, here's sometimes how people act when they're angry. Because, there's different personalities out there. Some people act with bitterness. In what way might I act with bitterness when I'm angry? Well, some people are the type of people who pout when they're angry. Some people are the type of people who kind of give you that silent treatment when they're angry. Some people are the I'm going to cuss you out when I'm angry type person. And some people are the I'm never going to talk to you again type people. And Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 31 really describes all those different types of people. Bitterness is pouting, it's silent treatment, it's that bad attitude type of anger that we show people when we are upset with them. And the devil's working on you when you're using that type of anger, when you're acting out with that type of anger. But what else does he talk about here? Well, he talks about wrath and clamor. When I think of clamor, that word, I think of pots and pans banging. You ever know somebody that's a door slammer? You ever know somebody likes to punch walls when they're angry? All it takes is you breaking your hand once, and that'll cure you of that. I knew a guy that punched a glass door and put his hand through it and ended up in the emergency room. He didn't do that again. But some people are the type of people that are really loud and really noisy, and I'm going to scream and I'm going to yell and I'm going to holler at you. They're the argumentative, loud type of arguers. It's like they want everybody in the house, everybody in the neighborhood sometimes to know they're mad about something. The devil's working on you when that's how you lash out in your anger. There's some people that aren't either way. Some people aren't the bitter, silent treatment type of people. Some people aren't the yell and holler type of people. Some people are the slandering type of people. And they won't say anything to you, but they'll say things to other people about you to try to harm and hurt your reputation. And that's called slander. That's gossiping. That's backbiting. It's maliciously injuring someone from a distance. Sneak attack. It's kind of the sniper attack to dealing with your anger. If you are involved, I don't know what you're like. I know a little bit about what I'm like, and I know a little bit about what my kids are like sometimes. But if you are involved, you know what you're like in any of these types of words, then you are not what Christianity looks like. You're misrepresenting the brand. You're in violation of contract and of covenant. The red light needs to kick in with our conscience if we're beginning to act out in our anger in these ways. The Lord calls us to rein it in and to exhibit self-control. What does he want us to do with our words instead? He says in verse 29, use words that are good for necessary edification. He says in verse 32, let's be kind to one another. Let's be kind to one another. If your words are viewed towards others as harsh, as abrasive, as unkind, as petty, and mean, then you violate the brand. You're not wearing the trademark the way that you should be. Let's be kind to one another. And guess what? Sometimes we're going to get hurt by each other. And when we get hurt by others, the Christian brand, the trademark is not vengeance, but it's forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Sometimes we will get disappointed, and sometimes we will be legitimately disappointed. And when that happens, we need to try to reconcile that relationship and be willing to forgive when the process takes place. And so, Christians need to be kind of like that stoplight. Know when to go, know when to stop, know when to be very cautious and discreet in your actions. Well, here's another one. Maybe Christianity is represented also by the shovel. When I was doing landscaping I think I was probably in high school, maybe college when this happened, but we were doing a huge planting project for an apartment complex. We had an entire trailer full of big trees. I'm talking these had a really big root ball on them, 3 feet by 3 feet wide by 3 feet deep. And normally we had a bobcat that we would take out to projects, and we had an auger on the bobcat, and we would dig the holes with the auger. But we were out here planting trees in this complex one day, and it had been very wet, and if we would have taken the bobcat out, we would have destroyed all of the grass. And so I went to the landscape architect, and I said, hey, I can't drive the bobcat out here. It's going to destroy. What should we do? And you know what he did? He brought me a shovel. And I looked down this very long row of grass, this very long line of apartments, and I thought, oh boy, it's going to be a long day. I was ready to call in sick. But I'm a person of honesty as a Christian, so I couldn't do that. So we had to work really hard that day, digging those holes by hand. The shovel to me, it just represents labor. In Ephesians 4, verse 28, it says, the one, he's still talking about the person who's put on the new self, the Christian. The one who steals must no longer steal, but rather he must labor, producing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with the one who has need. It should not be our goal in life to live off of others when we are capable of supporting ourselves. Sometimes we physically steal because we refuse to honestly labor. 2 Thessalonians 3 says, you don't deserve to eat when we're too lazy to work. From the time of the Garden of Eden, God has intended for man to work. And Christians should be people who are willing to work. We should be the most reliable, the most dependable laborers in the workforce. We can't be afraid of shovels. Christ worked as a carpenter. Christ, did you notice who he chose? He chose working men to be his apostles. Some of them fishermen, some of them might have been a tax collector, might have been a physician, but Jesus chose these people to be disciples of his. Paul helped build tents to support himself. There is a precedent of work embedded in these men. The foundation of the church is built upon men who are willing and were willing to labor. Later, when you look at Ephesians 6, Paul would speak more about how we are to work. He says in verse 5, be obedient to your masters. He says in verse 6, don't do it with eye service as men pleasers, but do the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men. He says in verse 8, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Christians are people who are willing to work. Christianity does not look like begging or mooching or laying around, and it doesn't look like stealing. It looks like a carpenter in his wood shop who's toiling and laboring and working for others. So if you're a Christian, be a person that's willing to work. Christianity, well, here's the obvious trademark as you read Ephesians, right? It looks like a cross. And the passage that was our reading today is Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. It says, therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. When you think of the cross, you think of sacrifice. And this passage indicates that the love of Christ is indicated by the sacrifice of Christ. He gave himself up for us in offering. You know, Christ could have been selfish and could have never have left heaven if he wanted to. But by his own free will, we read in Philippians chapter 2, he came to this earth, humbled himself, became obedient even to the point of death, and he did so for our benefit to serve as our ransom for sin. So if I'm being Christ-like, if I'm wearing that brand, if that's a part of my trademark, then being Christ-like means that I'm willing to sacrifice my own selfish interests for the good of others. In Philippians chapter 2, let's just go ahead and turn there while we're thinking about it. Verses 5 through 8 is the section where it talks about what Christ did. But the reason why he tells us, Paul writes about what Christ did in coming to earth, is because he was asking people to start taking upon themselves the mindset of Christ. He says in verse 3, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. That's why he talks about the fact that Jesus wasn't selfish when he came to earth. He was being selfless. He says, in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Jesus wasn't just thinking about what would have been best for him when he came to earth. He was thinking about what would be best for you and for me. And he says in verse 4 of Philippians 2, let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. It is the trademark of Christian love and service to be willing to sacrifice our time. There are going to be times where we wish we could use our time for ourselves, and yet we realize that there is a need in someone else's life that we can help serve, and so we sacrifice our time to meet that need, to be of service to them, to help them. There are going to be times that we give of our energy. I'm sure that on some Saturdays, you guys have been in the situation where somebody is moving and you sure like to use that energy to do some yard work on your own house, and you pitch in and help someone else move. You give of your energy and your muscle and your effort to help someone else during that time. I saw on the back bulletin board there's a list of all the different things that different people bring when there's a funeral or something like that here in the congregation. I'm sure when moments like that arise, there are other things that we could be doing with our time, but we stop what we're doing because we realize it's our job to sorrow with others who sorrow, to weep with those who weep, and we sacrifice our time and our energy and our money in order to help them during their time of need. There are times that we sacrifice our money and our resources in order to benefit and invest in other people. That's part of carrying the cross as we live for Jesus and like Jesus. But there's just one more thing. We could look at many, but there's just one more thing. As I look at the text of Ephesians chapter 4 and 5 that I think indicates to us another one of the trademarks of Christianity. Christianity looks kind of like a white wedding dress. What does a white wedding dress represent? I think we're about to have a wedding, right? Claire is about to get married here in a week or two, and I'm sure that she'll be, I don't want to assume anything, but I'm sure she's going to be wearing a white wedding dress, and Dad is going to be back there blabbering and crying in the back, and excited and crying all at the same time because this little girl's getting married off. But that white wedding dress symbolizes purity. It symbolizes purity. And as Christians, we're to be people of purity. The rest of the world may be impure. The rest of the world may glamorize sexual immorality and sexual liberty and freedom, as we see so common in our culture. But in Ephesians 5 and verse 3, it says, sexual immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be mentioned among you, as is proper among saints. That may have been part of your past lifestyle before you were a Christian. But once you become a Christian, then those aren't the things that we glamorize. Those aren't the things that we talk about or even joke about. Verse 4 says, there must be no filthiness or foolish talk or vulgar joking, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know with certainty, that no sexually immoral or impure or greedy person, which amounts to an idolater, has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Paul lists in this section several impurities which pollute God's purpose for man and our Christian walk. If we're engaged in sexual impurity, and that might also include mental impurity in this passage through things like pornography, or if we're even engaged in financial impurity, which he talks about greed here, then we are not living the way that God calls his people to live. And as a contrast to this type of impurity, Paul would later emphasize the beauty and the purity of God-ordained family. God-ordained family, when you look at Ephesians chapter 5, consists of a wife who submits to the lead of her godly husband. And let me tell you, wives, it's going to be much easier to submit to your husband when your husband is submitting to him, to Jesus Christ himself. It consists of a husband who leads and loves his wife as Christ would love the church. You're going to do a lot better job of loving your wife and leading your wife when Christ is leading you. It consists of children who understand the godly guidance of their parents is for their own good in this life and in the next. And when you read Ephesians 6, that's why it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, because God wants you to live a long life on this earth. It's for your good. That's what purity looks like in the home. There's certain roles that God has ordained for the home, for the husband, for the wife, and for our children. And when those roles are functioning the way that God intended, then the home is certainly more pure. When we begin to violate the purity of those relationships and their roles, then we tarnish the image that Christ wants the world to see for his followers. And so what are some of the trademarks of Christianity? Well, it's not just these physical things. I hope you understand, just like that bow tie and that white shirt and that bib overalls, it's not really that's the trademark. It's all that it represents. And it's not diamond that we're really thinking about here today. It's that you as a Christian need to be beautifully unique compared to the world around you. That's the drawing power of Christ in you. When you are different from the world, it compels people, it causes people to want to be like you. And they see that. Trademarks of Christianity are honesty. Be people of honesty. Be people of self-control. Be people of hard work. Be people who are willing to sacrifice, and people of purity. Those should be our trademarks. That's how we should be known if we are followers of Jesus Christ.